Colombian soldiers kicked open the doors of a prison kitchen in July 1992 and found racks of imported wine, a walk-in freezer packed with lobster tails, and a personal chef still standing at the stove. This was La Catedral, the private prison Pablo Escobar designed and built for himself on a hillside above Medellin, where the most wanted drug lord on earth served his sentence on his own terms inside a facility the Colombian government would later admit it never controlled. Number 18 fed a dining table full of cartel associates who drove hours up a mountain road just to be there. Number 8 turned a prison yard into something no correctional facility should ever resemble. And number 1 was the last meal served before Escobar walked out of his own prison and vanished into the Colombian mountains. So hit subscribe, because what this man ate behind his own walls will change how you think about doing time. Here are 25 meals Pablo Escobar actually ate inside the prison he built. Number 25. Arepas de choclo. Every morning at La Catedral started the way mornings start across the Antioquia region. Fresh corn arepas, pressed by hand and grilled on a plancha until the edges browned and crisped. But these were not stamped out in a government cafeteria. They came from a private kitchen staffed by cooks Escobar hired and paid himself, using fresh masa ground from locally sourced corn. No prepackaged mix, no metal trays, just a flatbread that half of Colombia eats for breakfast, prepared inside a building where the man eating it had personally negotiated the terms of his own imprisonment with the Colombian government, the simplest item on the menu, and already a world apart from any prison breakfast on earth. Number 24. Caldo de costilla. Beef rib broth slow-simmered with potato, cilantro, and scallion until the meat slides off the bone. It is the standard Antioqueño morning meal, served in home kitchens and roadside stalls across the region. At La Catedral, the broth was ladled into ceramic bowls and brought to Escobar's table still steaming, prepared by kitchen staff using beef sourced through his family's network of cattle ranches in the Magdalena Medio Valley. In government-run Colombian prisons, inmates ate whatever the state budget stretched to cover, typically rice, beans, and a thin soup. Escobar ate what his personal kitchen decided to prepare that morning. That gap defined everything about La Catedral. Number 23. Fresh tropical fruit. Platters of sliced mango, papaya, guanabana, and lulo arrived at the prison daily from farms scattered across the surrounding hillsides. La Catedral sat above the town of Envigado, ringed by some of the most productive agricultural land in Colombia. The fruit was not canned, not processed, and not rationed by a corrections officer with a clipboard. It was picked ripe that morning and delivered fresh, placed on the table the same way it would appear in any wealthy household in Medellin. Even the guards stationed inside the compound ate the same fruit. At La Catedral, even the men assigned to guard Escobar ate better than most free citizens in the country. Number 22. Frijoles antioqueños. Slow-cooked red beans simmered for hours with pork hock, green plantain, and a base of cumin and sofrito are the backbone of Antioqueño cooking. No meal from the region is considered complete without a pot of frijoles on the table. At La Catedral, the beans were made daily in the prison kitchen, seasoned the way Escobar's family had always prepared them. It sounds humble, and in isolation it is. But the fact that a maximum security inmate was eating home-style frijoles cooked to his personal taste rather than whatever a government contractor ladled from a steel vat told you everything about who was actually running this facility. Number 21. Freshly ground Colombian coffee. Colombia produces some of the most sought-after coffee beans on earth, and Escobar drank his the way any wealthy Colombian would. Whole beans ground fresh each morning, brewed strong in the regional tinto style, and served black or with steamed milk. Not the instant powder that inmates in government facilities dissolved in lukewarm water. The beans came from regional growers, and the coffee reached Escobar's table alongside breakfast, hot and fragrant. At La Catedral, even the way coffee was prepared was an assertion of control. Escobar did not submit requests through a warden's office or fill out a dietary form. He told his kitchen staff what he wanted, and it appeared. The coffee was a small thing, but it established the pattern that governed every meal on this list. Number 20. Bandeja paisa. The defining dish of the Antioquia region is a platter loaded with red beans, white rice, seasoned ground beef, chicharrón, a fried egg, sweet plantain, chorizo, hogao sauce, a slice of avocado, and an arepa on the side. It is enormous, calorie-dense, and deeply tied to regional identity. Escobar grew up poor in the hills outside Medellin, and bandeja paisa was the dish that marked the line between hunger and abundance in his life. At La Catedral, it was served on porcelain, not prison-issue plastic, every component prepared separately by kitchen staff who treated the platter as a point of professional pride. Other inmates across Colombia received a spoonful of rice and whatever protein the facility could afford that week. Escobar got the dish that defined his entire region, plated the way a restaurant in El Poblado would serve it. Number 19. Empanadas. Handmade empanadas, stuffed with seasoned ground beef and potato, were fried fresh in the La Catedral kitchen and served alongside ají, the bright, spicy dipping sauce that accompanies every empanada sold anywhere in Colombia. Visitors to the prison described a smell that hung over the compound, hot oil and browning dough, closer to a street food market than anything resembling a correctional facility. Escobar offered empanadas to nearly every person who walked through his doors. Lawyers, politicians, business partners, and family members all sat down to the same fried pastry, passed around a table inside a building the Colombian state formally classified as a prison. Number 18. Sancocho de gallina. This is where La Catedral stopped pretending to be a prison entirely. Sancocho is Colombia's great communal stew, a massive pot built from whole hen, yucca, plantain, corn on the cob, potato, and fistfuls of fresh cilantro, all simmered for hours until the broth turns deep gold and the chicken falls apart at the touch of a wooden spoon. Every region of Colombia claims its own version, but in Antioquia, Sancocho de gallina is the one that gathers families around a single table. At La Catedral, it gathered cartel members. Escobar hosted long afternoon lunches around the Sancocho pot, inviting associates, lawyers, and allies who made the drive up the winding mountain road from Medellin specifically to sit at his table. The dining area inside the prison compound seated dozens of guests at once, and the kitchen was built to handle the volume. Former visitors described afternoons that stretched past sunset, bowls refilled without asking, conversations shifting between personal stories and operational decisions involving sums of money most nations would envy. The stew itself costs almost nothing to make. A tough old hen, root vegetables, whatever herbs grow in the yard. It is peasant food, designed to stretch across a large table and leave no one hungry. The fact that the men sitting around this particular pot controlled a significant portion of the global cocaine trade made the simplicity of the dish almost surreal. They ate from the same recipe their grandmothers used, inside a prison compound that cost more to build than most Colombian schools. The sancocho was not just food, it was a ritual that told every man at that table nothing had changed, that the walls around them were a formality, and that the life they had built together continued uninterrupted over a bowl of chicken stew. Number 17. Chicharrón. Thick slabs of pork belly, scored across the skin, rubbed with coarse salt and fried in their own rendered fat until the rind crackled like broken glass. Chicharrón is fundamental to Antioqueño food, present at nearly every serious meal, torn by hand and eaten alongside rice and beans. At La Catedral, the pork was sourced locally and prepared fresh each time, not reheated from a batch cooked 3 days earlier the way institutional kitchens operate. The sound of hot oil splitting pork skin carried across the compound. For Escobar, chicharron was not a luxury, it was home. The difference was that he was eating it inside a maximum security facility. Number 16. Tamales antioqueños. Making a proper antioqueño tamal is an all-day project. The masa is mixed with pork, chicken, potato, carrot, peas, rice, and green olives, then wrapped tightly in banana leaves and steamed for hours until the entire bundle turns soft, dense, and fragrant. In most Colombian families, tamales are reserved for December holidays and major celebrations because of the labor involved. At La Catedral, they appeared on the table whenever Escobar wanted them. His kitchen staff had the time, the ingredients, and the training to produce them on any given Tuesday. A dish that most households in the country prepare once a year was available on demand inside a Colombian prison. Number 15. Mondongo. Tripe soup simmered low with pork trotters, potato, yucca, and a deep sofrito base of tomato, onion, and garlic. Mondongo is a Saturday staple across Colombia, the kind of dish that rewards patience and requires a strong stomach during the preparation stages. At La Catedral, it appeared on the regular rotation, prepared by cooks who cleaned and braised the tripe properly, rather than serving the rubbery, half-cooked version common in institutional kitchens. Escobar's food preferences were not exotic. They were regional, traditional, and rooted in the meals he grew up eating. He simply ate them in a place where no one else on earth could have arranged the same menu. Number 14. The bar. When the Colombian army finally entered La Catedral in July 1992, one of the first rooms they documented was a fully operational drinking establishment built inside the prison walls. Shelves lined with bottles of imported Scotch whiskey, aged Colombian rum, French cognac, and case after case of aguardiente, the anise-flavored spirit that functions as Colombia's national drink. The bar had proper glassware, ice service, a refrigerator, and a sound system that turned the room into something closer to a Medellin nightclub than a holding facility. Escobar and his associates drank openly inside the prison, hosting evenings that ran past midnight with music pushing through the walls. The aguardiente alone would have been unremarkable anywhere else in the country. It is the drink of choice at every party, every roadside gathering, every celebration in Colombia. But it was flowing freely inside a building the justice system had classified as a maximum security prison. The imported Scotch was another matter entirely. It carried a price that most working Colombians would never pay in their lives, and seeing it stocked by the bottle inside an inmate's quarters crossed a line that even the most generous reading of Colombian prison regulations could not justify. The bar was not hidden. It was not smuggled through a tunnel or buried in a wall. It was a furnished, decorated room, purpose-built inside a facility that existed only because Pablo Escobar had told the Colombian government he would surrender if they let him design his own prison. They agreed, and this is what he built. The soldiers who finally walked in and cataloged those bottles had been stationed at the perimeter for just over a year, forbidden from entering the inner compound. When they saw the bar, they were looking at evidence of everything they had suspected but never been permitted to confirm. Number 13. Grilled beefsteaks from his own ranches. Escobar's family controlled vast cattle properties across the Colombian countryside, stretching through the Magdalena Medio and Antioquia regions. The beef that reached La Catedral came through that network. Thick cuts, grilled over wood coals by kitchen staff who knew how he preferred his meat. In a country where the quality of beef on any given table is directly tied to wealth and connections, Escobar ate grass-fed, ranch-raised cuts that most Colombians only encountered behind the glass of expensive Medellin steakhouses. The grill marks on his steak were made by a cook standing inside a maximum security prison compound. That sentence makes no sense anywhere else on earth. At La Catedral, it was simply dinner. Number 12. Lechona tolomense, a whole pig, gutted and stuffed with seasoned rice, dried yellow peas, and slow-cooked spices, then roasted for up to 12 hours until the skin turned hard and glassy as porcelain. Lechona is Colombia's great celebration dish. It appears at weddings, baptisms, election victories, and New Year's dinners, and it always draws a crowd because of its sheer size and the spectacle of carving it open at the table. At La Catedral, lechona was prepared inside the compound whenever there was an event to mark, and for a man who had built his own prison, selected his own guards, and continued running a multi-billion-dollar international operation from behind walls he controlled, there was always something worth celebrating. Number 11. Imported European wine. French Bordeaux, Spanish Rioja, and Chilean Cabernet Sauvignon sat alongside the harder spirits at La Catedral. Wine was not part of traditional Antioqueño food culture, particularly not in the working-class world Escobar came from. But as his wealth expanded through the 1980s, his tastes grew with it. The bottles arrived through the same import channels that supplied the homes of Medellin's old money families, households that had spent generations building the kind of social position Escobar simply purchased with cash. Inside a Colombian prison, where water quality alone was a daily concern for most inmates, imported European wine occupied a category beyond luxury. It was a provocation. Number 10. Fresh seafood from the Caribbean coast. Lobster, shrimp, whole red snapper, and langoustine were transported from Colombia's Atlantic coastline to La Catedral on a regular basis. The prison sat high in the Andes, above the Aburra Valley, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest ocean. Getting fresh seafood to that elevation required air freight or a refrigerated vehicle moving fast on mountain switchbacks, and Escobar had access to both. The kitchen prepared lobster and shrimp the day they arrived, grilled or steamed and served with fresh lime. In Colombian government prisons, fish meant tinned tuna if it appeared at all. Escobar was eating live delivered lobster at an altitude where the nearest shoreline was a domestic flight away. Number 9. His mother, Hermilda's home cooking. Escobar's mother, Hermilda Gaviria, visited La Catedral regularly, and she never arrived empty-handed. Hermilda was a former schoolteacher from the town of Rio Negro who had cooked traditional Antioqueño meals her entire adult life. She carried pots of soup, trays of baked goods, and covered dishes prepared in her own kitchen at home. By all accounts, her food held a status at La Catedral that no hired professional could match. When Hermilda walked through the compound with a covered pot, the kitchen staff stepped aside without being asked. For all the imported scotch, the coastal lobster, and the restaurant-grade equipment, the meal Pablo Escobar valued most was carried up a mountain road in a cloth-wrapped pot by his mother. Number 8. Asado barbecues during soccer matches on the prison grounds. La Catedral had a full-size regulation soccer field built into the compound, and Escobar used it constantly. Matches were organized between inmates, visitors, and occasionally professional Colombian players who accepted invitations to drive up the mountain and play a few games. The matches drew crowds, and alongside the field, a permanent outdoor barbecue setup produced grilled beef ribs, chorizo, morcilla, chicken, and whole pork loins for spectators who had no legitimate connection to any prison. The asado was accompanied by cold beer and aguardiente, and the music played through speakers Escobar had mounted near the sideline. Photographs taken inside La Catedral during its 13 months of operation show green grass, white goalposts, and groups of men in civilian clothes eating from plates piled high with grilled meat. No prison uniforms. No officers timing a meal period. No plastic trays. The barbecue smoke drifted up from a compound that the Colombian government would eventually acknowledge it had never controlled from the inside. When military officials later reviewed what had occurred at La Catedral, the soccer barbecues appeared in nearly every debriefing. These were not recreational privileges approved by a warden. They were social events orchestrated by the inmate himself. Every guest who ate from that grill left the compound understanding exactly who held power on that hillside, and Escobar made certain they ate well enough to remember it. The barbecue at La Catedral was never really about the food. It was about the image. A man behind bars, standing next to a smoking grill on a green soccer field, serving plates of grilled meat to guests who had driven past a military checkpoint to get there. That image told a story no official statement could undo. Pablo Escobar was not serving time. He was hosting. Number 7. Swiss chocolate and imported European confections. When Colombian authorities inventoried La Catedral after the July 1992 raid, they cataloged boxes of Swiss chocolate, Belgian pralines, and packaged European biscuits stored alongside the regular food supplies. These items were not available in Colombian shops without paying steep import costs. Escobar's fondness for sweets was well documented by family members, and the imported confections represented the kind of quiet indulgence that revealed how completely La Catedral replicated a private, wealthy household. The chocolate by itself was not scandalous. Finding it stored inside a prison pantry made it impossible to maintain any pretense that the facility was a place of punishment. Number 6. Custom celebration cakes from Medellin bakeries. For birthdays, anniversaries, and victories that only Escobar's inner circle understood, elaborate multi-tiered cakes were ordered from professional bakeries in the city below and driven up the mountain to La Catedral. They arrived professionally decorated and large enough to serve dozens of guests. The bakeries that filled these orders understood exactly where the cakes were heading. In Medellin, in the early 1990s, everyone understood. The delivery vehicles passed through a military checkpoint at the base of the access road, continued past the outer perimeter without inspection, and pulled up to the entrance of a building the justice system had designated as a high-security correctional facility. Number 5. Roasted suckling pig at private parties. La Catedral hosted gatherings that went well beyond any legal definition of a prison visit. Associates, women, musicians, and guests from across the country arrived for evenings that ran until dawn. The centerpiece was frequently a whole suckling pig, slow-roasted over coals until the skin turned to crackling glass. It was carved at the table while guests drank from the bar and music filled the compound through Escobar's sound system. These events were catered and orchestrated inside a building operated by the Colombian Bureau of Prisons. The roast pig alone required hours of preparation and a dedicated cook tending the fire. It was the kind of production a prominent Medellin family might arrange for a holiday gathering. At La Catedral, it happened on a weeknight. Number 4. Restaurant meals delivered from Medellin. When Escobar wanted something his own kitchen could not produce, he ordered it from the city. Complete meals from Italian restaurants, Japanese spots, and high-end dining rooms in El Poblado were driven up the mountain road and delivered to his table still warm. The prison had no restrictions on incoming food deliveries, no inspection protocols, and no dietary oversight of any kind. Whatever Escobar telephoned for arrived at La Catedral, prepared to his specifications, without a single question from anyone wearing a uniform. The delivery runs were so routine that the restaurant drivers knew every curve on the mountain road by heart. It was room service, except the room was a prison cell and the guest had negotiated his own sentence. Number 3. Multi-course banquet dinners for cartel summits. When senior members of the Medellin cartel gathered at La Catedral for operational meetings, the kitchen produced formal multi-course meals: appetizer, soup, a main course of grilled beef or fresh seafood, dessert, and aged spirits served in crystal glassware. The dining room inside the compound seated enough people for a business conference, and the meals that accompanied these sessions stretched for hours. decisions involving distribution routes, territorial boundaries, and sums that dwarfed the annual budgets of entire Colombian departments were negotiated between courses. The dinner table at La Catedral functioned as the cartel's boardroom, and the food was not an indulgence. It was the cost of conducting business inside a building the state believed it controlled. Number 2. The Christmas feast of 1991. Escobar's first and only Christmas inside La Catedral was, by every available account, as lavish as any celebration he had ever hosted as a free man. His wife, his children, and his mother joined him inside the compound. Hermilda brought her traditional holiday dishes. The kitchen staff prepared lechona, tamales, buñuelos, natilla, and arroz con pollo for a gathering that filled the common areas with the sounds and smells of a full Colombian family Christmas. The children played on the grounds. The adults drank and ate until well past midnight. Outside the walls, Colombian soldiers sat at a perimeter they had been ordered never to cross. Inside, a family celebrated the holiday around a table loaded with food, as if the man sitting at the head of it had not been responsible for the deaths of thousands of people across the country he called home. Number 1. The Last Dinner Before the Escape. On the evening of July 21, 1992, Pablo Escobar sat down to eat inside La Catedral for the final time. The Colombian government had announced it intended to transfer him and his associates to a standard military prison. The army was closing in on the compound. Escobar understood what that transfer would mean. That night, those present describe a meal that was quiet by La Catedral standards. The kitchen prepared food. The bar was open. But the atmosphere had shifted. The music and the laughter that had defined 13 months of self-designed captivity were gone. Escobar ate among the handful of men who understood the arrangement was finished, that the government had reached the outer limit of what it could pretend to tolerate, and that the next 12 hours would determine whether any of them remained free. By dawn on July 22nd, Escobar and several associates walked out of La Catedral through the compound perimeter, disappearing into the fog that settles across the Envigado hillside most mornings before sunrise. When the army finally entered the building, they found it empty. The kitchen was still fully stocked. The bar still held its bottles. The plates from the previous night had been washed and stacked. The most elaborate prison kitchen in recorded history had served its final meal, and the man it was built to feed was already gone, walking through the mountains with a full stomach and 13 months of bought time behind him. He would never eat this well again. From that morning forward, Pablo Escobar was a hunted man, moving between safe houses across Medellin, eating whatever was available, sleeping in a different apartment every night. On December 2, 1993, Colombian security forces found him on a rooftop. He did not survive the afternoon. Every plate, every bottle, every meal served inside La Catedral told the same story. A man who was supposed to be paying for his crimes ate better than the soldiers stationed outside his walls. Which of these 25 meals surprised you the most? Drop your answer in the comments. If this is the kind of history that keeps you watching, hit subscribe and stick around, because the next one goes even deeper. Thanks for watching.